Jason is death. He is the face of death. If you see Jason, that white face, you're gonna die.
With Friday the 13th, you're tapping into the title alone. It was one of the most perfect titles for horror history.
That's a horror movie.
Killing naked teenagers, interestingly, in the woods with household implements. There you go. When kids went to see slasher movies, it wasn't just seeing the kids killed, it was how they were killed. The more unique, the more it was a magic trick. Even Friday the 13th went for the 3D effects, you know, just to keep it interesting.
All these guys, Kane, Robert, England, Tom Savini, myself, you know, Tobin, all have a presence of some kind.
You can't kill him. You can't. You can't. In these movies, if you kill him, then you've now lost the superhuman element and the superhuman fear element. Once that guy gets killed off, then the movie is not that scary anymore. You won't see it twice.
One of the things is that basically Jason is the shark. You know, he doesn't die. You can't kill him no matter what you do. He's been blown up. He's been cut into pieces. He's been just about everything that you can imagine, but he just keeps coming back.
You're a human version of Jaws. You have no reason, you just do it. To not be able to express yourself verbally, then you have to kind of create a character by your movements and your actions and the way you look and the way you walk.
The most common thing is, you gave me nightmares, or you scared the bejesus out of me, or you creeped me out when I was in high school.
You can get an attitude by standing still, or you can get an attitude by huffing and puffing. And it's just like, you know, which one is really the one that's going to scare somebody the most?
Well, the element that really makes a slasher film work, in my opinion, is surprise and the building up of tension, and how the actors can be really convincing about fear, because there's that real visceral fear.
It's always the innocence of a horror movie. You know, when it first starts out, like, there I was, you know, walking in the town, you know, skipping, enjoying my life, missing the turn to Camp Crystal Lake. And that moment, you know, I was in trouble. And of course, what does anybody in trouble do? They run into the woods.
There's always like 2 or 3 couples and the odd guy out, who's not part, he's always Bob's best friend. Why did he have to come along with us, you know?
Yeah, you definitely need the odd man out, someone like Shelley, because a lot of the audience feels like they're the odd man out, and the odd man out is the character that they relate to more than anyone else.
Why do people love to go see horror movies? You know, that it must make them feel alive, to get that feeling of, you know, that anxiety of, oh my God, don't run into the woods, don't, you know, because that's what happens when you're watching those movies.
They came out, especially Halloween and Friday the 13th, at a time when there was no horror movies. And there certainly wasn't horror movies like that, you know, with the mask and, you know, no talking, and it endured because of quality, you know, the movie. You can tell that the director and producers and the crew and the writer, they put their heart and soul into these movies. And I know for a fact because of doing Halloween, right? So, and that gets conveyed on film. You can feel that when you're watching a movie. It's not just something that just slapped together and just, they got lucky, you know?
This was something that grew out of dissent. This golden age of horror grew out of the whole 60s, 70s thing where we were fighting within our own society. And I think it was a very big milestone. It, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, they all came within a certain time period of about 8 to 10 years that I think really forced a change in movies, forced a change in prosthetics and practical effects, and forced a change in the way that we actually look at things.
Universality, like that cutting across the cultural lines I'm talking about. When it does work, it's something that someone in an urban area of East St. Louis and the down home of Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama can all identify with. And it's something that makes the skin crawl in some way, some universal truth, some hidden nightmare that's given some sort of vision.
We go to those movies for a basic scenario and we get it. And then we want to go, yeah, and have the blood fly and have a good time and walk out and I mean, why do you ride the same ride at Disneyland over you've already ridden it once? But we want that same thrill, and there's something nice about the familiarity of it.
The realm of horror, from its inception, deals with the Shadow Kingdom, deals with the underworld, deals with, like Jekyll and Hyde, man dealing with his own darker side. And there's some very deep psychological elements there, and spiritual and mystical elements there, none of which are in Friday the 13th. And that's what makes it wonderful, because it's free of those elements. It's not about some underworld mystical power. It's about this child trapped in the body of an indestructible monster. Its vengeance gone terribly awry.
When Jason was, first conceived for the original film, he wasn't meant to be an icon. He wasn't the star of the film. He was sort of an afterthought, a chair jumper they needed for the last reel of the film. So the look of Jason was sort of put together, piecemeal. Tom Savini brought some of the visual aspect to the table. Victor Miller kind of wrote a little backstory for him, and everyone sort of kind of got together and kind of created this little crazy kid popping out of the swamp. And then when part 2 came along, they realized, well, we have to promote Jason to, the main villain, so we have to flesh him out a bit. So that job fell to Ron Kurtz, the screenwriter of Part 2, who sort of conceived the idea that Jason had been living sort of as this feral kid in the woods, waiting for his mother to return. And then Tom Savini chose not to return for Friday Part 2, so they hired a makeup artist named Carl Fullerton, who took the basic concepts that Savini had created in the first film for Jason, and just added to it. He added hair, a different kind of larger head, a bigger build. So Jason sort of slowly developed over the first 2 movies, and at the time, they just needed a mask, something to cover Jason's face. So they did some various makeup tests, and they chose what was kind of become known as the bag, which is just a burlap sack with a rope tied around it and one little eye hole. There was a movie that came out shortly after the end of production of Part 2 called The Elephant Man, and it featured a lead character who was deformed. He used to wear a burlap sack on his head. So when Friday the 13th Part 2 came out a few months later, suddenly there was this association between Jason and this character in this film, which was a very serious, dramatic piece. So unfortunately, when audiences went to see Part 2, suddenly they were thinking Elephant Man, and Jason wasn't that scary. So it kind of created an unintentional humorous aspect at the time. But now I think, 20-odd years later, for better or for worse, people remember Friday the 13th and Jason more than they remember the Elephant Man. So when people see Friday Part 2, they're not thinking that anymore. So a lot of fans now really kind of like the bag. It kind of has a creepy, kind of deliverance kind of feel, backwoods feel to it. When Friday Part 3 went to production, the filmmakers realized that the bag wasn't working. So they decided we have to come up with a new mask. So they created a kind of a series of tests. They kind of just did different basic masks and different looks for Jason. And then just by chance, one of the crew members on the film had a hockey mask in his bag. Pulled it out and put it on, and Steve Meyer, the director, was like, wow, that looks pretty scary.
One day we decided to do makeup tests in 3D to see what Jason would look like, because prior to Part 3, Jason wore a bag on his head in 1 and 2, and we didn't want to use the bag, and we didn't know what his face should look like, and everybody was arguing, and because we were from Buffalo and so many of us were hockey players, we actually had a team. Frank Mancuso Jr. was on the team, and we had a hockey team. And I had my goalie mask with me that day, and I kiddingly said, put on the goalie mask, and then we won't have to worry about any makeup.
The infamous mask, as we all know it. This mask, unfortunately, is not the original mask. It is a replica of the original mask. Story has it that the original mask was left on a pole outside Marty Becker's office, and it sat on a pole for about 10 years until it eventually wilted away in the sun. The story that I know is that the mask was originally designed by Stan Winston. And we all know Stan Winston, number of Oscars he won and all the wonderful work that he's done.
The hockey mask is actually more than one mask. The original one was leather and fit Shelley fine. But the one for Jason, that particular leather mask when it was on was just too small, so we had to make a larger vacuform mask as a copy from it. It took multiple stages of building it up to get to that point. Many people may not know that the mask is actually made from clear plastic. And I did that because I didn't want the paint to chip off the front. And so I painted it from behind. And the outside, the little red pieces are red acetate that are glued on with super glue. At the end of the movie, of course, you get the axe in it. That particular head is a copy of Richard Brooker's real head with the Jason makeup applied to it. And there's actually a 1/4-inch thick steel plug on the inside my hand fit into, because I'm actually puppeting that head when Dana hits it. And I didn't want the axe, of course, hit my hand. All that's fake at the end. When the camera's over Richard's shoulder, shooting her come up and hit him in the head, and you see the axe hit him in the head. I'm below it with the hand and my hand inside the head, and when I get the hit, I have to flip the axe handle up. And then it's a quick cut to the front with Richard with the makeup on with the axe embedded in his head already. It's just a prop to us. I mean, he looked cool in it. It was a cool idea, and it was a great way to hide the makeup until we really wanted to see it. Nobody knew it was going to become an icon.
Who are you?
Well, after part 3 had come out, the producers started noticing that Halloween, a lot of kids were buying hockey masks and wearing them as costumes. And so they kind of realized, hey, the hockey mask is really resonating with the fans and the culture. So when Friday the 13th, the final chapter, went in production the next year, there was no question they were going to use the hockey mask. So they actually went back to the same molds they used for part 3, and they created the same exact mask. They did hire a new stuntman, Ted White, to play Jason. So there's a slightly different look to him. I mean, the mask is the same, but because his head shape is slightly different and his body type, he has a slightly different look, but it's pretty close, but the mask is exactly the same. I think every film, the filmmaker tried to look at what had come before in terms of Jason's look. They wanted to do something new and different to give Jason, somewhat of a different appearance for the fans, at the same time keep consistency. So like, for example, in part 7, John Carl Buechler, the director, who was also the makeup supervisor on the film, he really wanted to maintain the mask, the consistency of the mask, make sure all the markings and the damage, matched. So that mask was one of the fan favorites because it has the axe hit from part 3, it has the damage from part 6, but it's also been eaten away because Jason's been living underwater for 5 years or so. So it's kind of missing the whole jawline there. So that's a very cool mask. When part 8 came along, Rob Hedden, the director, decided to give Jason a new mask. Jason's been underwater without a mask for, again, a number of years. He gets resurrected. And when a character has a mask, and that's where Jason gets it from, so it's a fresh mask. It has kind of a yellowish look, because now Jason's more of a swampy kind of submerged creature. So he's very slick. Like, Jason in that entire film is just covered in slime. They oozed him up all the time, so he kind of looks like the Swamp Thing with a mask. At the end of part 8, Jason sort of gets toxic wasted to death. He gets melted, literally, and all that's left is kind of a mutated little mask. There was a sense of completion, so even if the series had not continued, the fact that Jason was truly killed for good and all that's left is kind of a little melted hockey mask sort of gave a little poetic feel to the series at that point, but of course it did go on.
If it had picked a different mask, it really would have, I don't know that Friday the 13th would have continued. I mean, if they had chosen a bozo mask, for example, which kind of would have been a little frightening, but it's kind of interesting to play that parallel universe game and go, what would have happened had that been the case?
The hockey mask definitely has an element of strength to it. I think a lot of the slasher villains didn't have. I mean, Michael Myers had a very sort of pasty, pale, ghostly, almost frail face. Freddy was burned, and he talked a totally different kind of character, but Jason just had this machine-like quality. It's almost like a slasher movie version of the Terminator. So I think what the hockey mask gave Jason was a sense of indestructibility to him. You really felt that you were looking at a creature that was not going to be stopped.
The hockey mask, I think it works because it's blank. It lets the audience project their own fears onto there. What is there? What's under there? I don't think even after this movie, the part 3, that the hockey mask had become an iconic symbol. It wasn't until it had appeared in numerous movies that I think people really made the association of where now if you say hockey mask, people say Jason Voorhees.
Now he becomes this incredibly recognizable character. I mean, it's like Freddy's Freddy. You can't miss it. You can't mistake it. Jason's Jason now because of the mask. Once you see somebody with a mask on, you know who it's supposed to be.
We were told, and we believed, that part 4 was going to be the final chapter. I mean, final chapter as in no more Jason, no more Fridays, no more nothing. Therefore, it was going to be a movie about the death of Jason.
It was one of the oddest script developments I've ever been in. We worked speedily on this, and that's probably the reason that Zito wanted to leave that room with a script that he would bleed for.
I thought I would never hear from the Friday the 13th people again after the first one, because 2 went by. They did not offer me part 3. But the idea of offering me the film where I get to kill Jason made me feel like Dr. Frankenstein. I created the monster, and I get to kill him.
I thought the most interesting way to deal with the movie about the death of Jason was to bookend it with the dead Jason. We had to go back to the location where Friday 3 was shot and re-stage how it might have been. So the shot that got designed came down from the beam of the helicopter overhead, came down with it on a crane. And the Steadicam operator was actually standing on the crane, steps off the crane and starts to move, and he keeps going and running back and forth. And in the end, the idea is to go through all of this and reveal the dead Jason. I wanted you to be in the presence of the dead Jason so long that in the end, I was hoping that audiences would start cheering him to life. Then they become the authors of his resurrection. And they take the responsibility for that. I don't have to sell it to them. They're, in fact, demanding it. We went through a bunch of guys. We auditioned Jasons and found Ted White, who was a very experienced Hollywood stunt guy.
But what I had done prior to coming on to the show, I had gone down and rented number 2, I think it was 2 or 3, and I watched the way they moved, the way Jason moved, and I decided that I didn't want him to be a big, clumsy oaf. So I did change it. I changed it to where I moved faster, and I tried to make the kills a little swifter.
I remember being on the set one day, and I said something about how he should twist the head on Bruce Mahler. And I remember him saying, look, you do the makeup effects, and I'll do the stunts, meaning he knows what to do physically and I. So he got up and he walked away. I looked at Kevin Yeager and I went, and I just jumped up and I followed Ted and I stopped him. I said, you know what, when you said that, it offended me because I've done stunts. He says, yeah, I heard that about you. Everybody thought the next thing was going to be a punch, you know, to my head. And from that moment on, we became pals.
The casting of Kimberly in this role was, I think, a really good piece of business for us because she really takes Jason on physically. This is not someone who just, screams and faints. This is someone who fights him with a hammer and pounds him into the mask.
The scenes where I was actually fighting with Ted White, who played Jason, yeah, they were really pretty violent. He's a stuntman and I'm not. And we really fighting.
The casting of this boy was a big deal, and we saw a lot of kids, and nothing seemed right. And they finally brought in this young Corey Feldman, who had experience, he had acted.
The scenes with Corey Feldman were great. He was a really sweet boy. I related to him because I was a child actor, and I had a lot of empathy for him.
He was a mean little kid. When I say mean, he was very, very active on the set. He wasn't very well mannered, And when I finally got to the scenes where we were upstairs and I had my hand so close to him that I could have gotten a hold of him.
Still, he could take direction, and he knew the lines, and he would do them and do them over again, and didn't, wasn't cranky and wasn't childlike. He was professional.
I have to say this, as mean as he was very good in the film. I liked him. I liked the way he did it, and I liked the way he worked. I felt like he had the energy of an adult as opposed to that of a kid.
Some of the kills in the film were designed by script in advance, cooked up, in the writing process. More of the kills, or some of the better kills, I think, were designed once we had all the special effects people aboard.
When Jason kills the nurse, I had tubing glued to her leg so the blood would trickle down the side of her leg. But the tubing had come loose. So when Jason was killing her, there was just a squirt of blood from right in the middle between her legs, hit the floor and formed a puddle, and she peed blood.
Hey, honey, you got a sister?
Tom sat down and went through with me exactly physiologically what would happen if I was being stabbed through the throat, that it would pierce the voice box, that, all the things that it would go through, and what would happen to you, what would happen to your voice, so that I could incorporate that as an actor. He had his hand on my head, but you will be absolutely safe, but don't fight me.
I think, though, the kill that meant the most to me was the kill of Rob in the basement.
I'm expecting that Tom Savini's going to come up with some way to hack as much of my flesh away as possible.
But you don't see that. You don't see any of the Tom Savini stuff that he designed, really.
We didn't want the audience to laugh when I died. He wanted to go to a more level of psychological horror than physical.
There were some arguments along the way, and one of those arguments was about the death of the mother.
We see that she's had an encounter with Jason. We know it hasn't turned out well. We never saw the actual poking or anything that went on. We didn't see any gutting or anything, no tools, implements, blood, but we're pretty sure she got it.
And the idea to me of kids watching a mother figure being ripped was extremely exciting. They're used to seeing kids being essentially punished for their loss of innocence. To see mom punished, that's grotesque.
The studio thought it would be a cool idea to have a dream sequence because it sort of relates to, part one, the original Friday the 13th.
I was originally told that this would be the last of the Jason movies, and I was told specifically to use my best screenwriting grammar to indicate that Jason is really dead, we're not kidding, really most sincerely dead.
We spent the entire shoot redesigning how Jason might get killed. There were a lot of ways. There were all kinds of suggestions.
I had a death that I thought would work that involved a microwave oven, where Tommy was also a little amateur inventor, and he had a little variable, took a microwave oven apart, put a reflector behind the microwave shooter, and melted a toy soldier on 1, and the thing went up to 10. I thought at the end, when Jason is chasing his sister, Tommy could jam this thing into Jason's head and turn up to 10 and cook Jason's head from within and make it explode.
But as we got close to the end, it became clear that the best idea was the most direct one, because what happens is it lets your characters really do the killing.
So I asked Joe for 2 things. 1, can I take his mask off? Joe said yes. I said, 2, can I have him touch Trisha's breast? And Joe said no. I think the act of touching the breast would have rendered him so completely human that he has finally thought of something else to do with girls that doesn't involve killing them. That was the moment that he was completely vulnerable, as we all are in moments of love. And so what I did was I wrote a scene where instead of cutting his head off, which in a sequel he could walk around with it under his arm or in a box, I split his head open from top to bottom with that machete, the way you cut an artichoke in half. And I thought that was at least sufficiently different to think, okay, this is over.
But John Vulich one day held up the Dawn of the Dead machete that I put into Lonnie Lisa's head. I said, that's it. We'll have Tommy whack Jason in the head with the machete, but let's go further and have Jason fall on his knees, fall on the machete, and slide down the blade.
And then I get not a rewrite, but an update on how we're not really going to put the machete through his head from top to Adam's apple. But we're going to do something different, like through the eye. And I knew then that they were leaving room for a sequel.
Every death was fast, 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 fast. And then when Jason died, it was slow. So having to trim the effects down to perhaps satisfy the ratings board helped in punching up the effectiveness and the shock of Jason's death, because we got to show that.
I wanted to leave something for people to build on for the subsequent series. And so I wanted Tommy Jarvis to sort of catch the germ of menace that Jason had. And that's why I was building him slowly into a character who at the end could become Jason.
That scene in the hospital room where I had to put my hand around him, and they said for me to put my hand at the base of his neck so that I would hide the wrinkles from the skull cap.
There's a scene that's not in the film where Tommy is at the water fountain. And so when he turns around, water is dripping from his lips in the way that the original little skinny Jason from the first was dripping water. So Tommy was always somebody I thought would live again.
As far as I'm concerned, we killed Jason. I mean, we really killed Jason in Final Chapter.
I can't believe it's been 25 years since I shot that movie. And I never in a million years would have guessed that it would have had such a huge following like it has.
You know, after this, he wandered around cities and moons and stuff like this, or whatever he did. I'm glad that he's out there and we can enjoy him some more. But we really did him in as far as I can tell.
When they decided to do Friday Part 3, there actually were some alternate ideas tossed around before they came up with the final script. Originally, Steve Miner wanted to take the character of Ginny Field from the second film, which was played by Amy Steele. The idea was to sort of have her have to deal with her experiences of dealing with Jason. She's now in a sanitarium, and she's having nightmares and visions, and murders start occurring in the sanitarium. They don't know, is it somebody else, is it Jason? But they sort of decided that that wouldn't really give the fans what they wanted. Also, they couldn't secure the return of Amy Steele. She didn't want to return to the role at the time. So when the filmmakers were thinking about Friday Part 3, they realized they kind of needed a new hook for the film. They needed something different and new to bring the fans in. They couldn't just repeat exactly the same formula. So they realized at the time that 3D had sort of kind of been reborn in the theaters. Frank Mancuso Sr., who was the head of production at Paramount at the time, saw that and realized, hey, this would be a great idea. You know, we could merge 3D with one of our big franchises, and he looked at the product that he had, and Friday the 13th seemed to be the perfect fit. It was an audience participation film, had a lot of objects and instruments being, you know, put into the camera all the time.
I had a neighbor in Buffalo, New York, who said to me one time, he was running the local branch of Paramount Pictures, if I ever become CEO of Paramount, we're going to make 3D movies. We're going to make 70mm movies like they did in the old days, and I'll take you with me. And believe it or not, which is even more of a Hollywood story than the movie is that Frank Mancuso did become the head CEO of Paramount Pictures, and he kept his promise, and he brought everybody out there. And one of the first films that we did was Friday the 13th in 3D. What was so exciting about shooting Friday the 13th is we wanted to take a new approach to shooting 3D. We all got together and decided the movie should be shot on a Lumicrane, which permitted the camera to do all kinds of incredible moves. And the camera, Steve Miner never wanted the camera stable. He wanted it to move and have that horror feeling. We decided that since we were working with a brand new camera that had just come out at the time, a new Aeroflex BL, which was very, very tiny and handheld, how would we come up with a system that could fit on it to maintain that free look of motion? This is the adapter unit that actually fit on the front of the Aeroflex camera, and you can see how light it is. It's very, very light. It was all electronically controlled. They could do all the strange things. They could bring spears out and arrows out and all kinds of incredible things. It's very light. It permitted the camera to move all the time. It's working out so well that it's being used today on the new Arri cameras, which are all digital.
The film was so technical with the 3D, and it was a 3D process that no one had ever done before, and that was really where everyone's focus was, and there wasn't a lot of focus on the acting. Insert joke here.
Friday Part 3 had the most arduous shoot of any of the Friday the 13th films. The 3D took a very, very long time to set up. I mean, takes would take hours and hours and hours to light and create. So I think for the actors, it was a difficult experience at times because a lot of attention was paid towards the technical aspect and not the performance aspect. So, for example, characters had to do death scenes over and over again. I know, for example, Richard Berker, who played Jason, had to, you know, poker stab someone 30, 40 times.
The one scene where the girl walks into the living room and she gets stabbed in the stomach with a red-hot poker. The actual scene of the poker going into the lens, if I can remember correctly, and you know, we're going back, what, 25 years now, we did 32 takes of that. 32 takes, just to make sure that we got the 3D effect.
When we had to do stuff that was directly 3D, meaning going right to the camera, it was very difficult because if you don't go right to the camera, it doesn't work. So there's a scene where I have to throw the wallet in the store, and that was just take after take because if it doesn't go right into the camera, it's not working. And then the juggling the oranges, and you're throwing them, and it was a high ceiling, so you're throwing them 10 feet in the air, trying to get to the camera, and you just kept going and kept going until they had enough. It was tough to set up and tough to do, but you know, it's fun.
The crew was worried about the 3D. I was also worried about, you know, the cast that they were not going to get hurt because we kept shooting the same thing over and over and over again, that they were padded properly, that they would not really going to get killed. I had to work with the stunt man, the stunt coordinator, and I did all the stunts myself in making sure that they were, again, that they were protected and that they would work and they wouldn't harm them underneath. Like when the girl hangs from the rafter, I had to go into the harness myself and hang for a couple and make sure, and I was really uncomfortable at some points.
I came up with the theory that Jason never runs. Jason is just there. Steve Miner made a very good point, and even in the casting session, the casting director said, well, can't we use a double for, you know, the scenes where we actually don't need Richard? And Steve Miner said, no. He said, I want him there all the time. Right in the beginning of the movie where he's taking down the laundry, his wife looks out the window and sees the shadow behind the sheet. And that was me. That wasn't a double or one of the crew members or anything else like that. That was me.
When we first started the show, we were told that Stan Winston was going to sculpt Jason's makeup, which was wonderful. Stan was one of my mentors back at that time. Stan was brought in to strictly just sculpt Jason's makeup and then paint it at the end.
The original Stan Winston mask, which was used for the alternate ending, was never used. In fact, the Stan Winston mask was never seen in the film at all.
There's actually 3 Jason makeups in the movie. The first one is Stan's makeup that you see in the alternate ending. The second one is in Dana's flashback sequence, where it was overlaid over her face. And then the third one is the final one at the end of the movie, where Jason gets hung and lifts the mask up, and then Dana's further dream sequence at the end when he comes out of the house.
We had a great time. For most of us, it was our first film, or first or second. I think only Dana had a lot of credits prior. And we just all hang out in the dressing rooms because there are long delays between shots, and it was, so we were having fun. We were just, we'd talk, and I think every day I asked Tracy Savage to marry me, and every day she turned me down. I asked Marty and Carol, I said, come on, can we write a scene where Shelley actually gets the girl? No amount of bribery would get that done. They were like, people will believe the homicidal maniac comes back from the dead. They will not believe that Shelley gets to kiss Vera.
I was in blood constantly. And because it was in a lot of night shooting, and you're carrying clothes full of dripping with blood, and then you're washing blood, and you're putting more blood in it, and the hours are going by, and more blood is going by, and I'm like, by the end of the 3 months, I was having extreme nightmares.
Oh, the nature of doing these kind of movies, that you always have to do blood effects. Blood effects donates that you're using artificial blood. Artificial blood has red dye in it. I don't care how much soap you add to it, surfactants or anything else you have, dye is dye. You know, they always ask you, will it wash out? I'll tell them no. Because I'm sure Sandy had a field day trying to wash everything out.
I don't know how many tanks we must have gone through. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sure I went through probably 15, 20 gallons of blood at least.
The ending changed 3 times from the original ending.
The film is basically the same up to the end where Chris thinks she defeats Jason. She hits him in the head with an axe and she goes to go to sleep. Then she wakes up, and at that point, that's when the endings really veer off. The original scripted ending had her waking up and going into the barn and discovering all her friends are dead. And Jason returns, and she actually decapitates him with a sickle.
Which you can read in the novelization if you ever catch up on that.
But the producers at the time felt that that would be too definitive in terms of killing Jason. They wanted to leave it open. So when it came down to shoot a new ending, Petru Popescu devised an idea of having Chris wake up in a canoe. She thinks she's safe. She runs to the lodge, and she sees Rick.
Even though we know he's dead, but she sees him in the house, and she gets out of the canoe and runs down in front of the cabin, and you see Rick in the house running parallel.
And the camera tracks them both, and then she runs to the front door, opens it, expecting to see Rick. It's actually Jason.
And he takes her head off.
And then she wakes up. It's just all been a dream. And they actually filmed this ending.
Why they didn't use it, I don't know. I remember watching them filming, and it was terrific, and I thought that it would have been great.
The producers decided that they really want to kind of go back to the classic idea of Jason kind of bursting through something or coming out of the water. So they scrapped that ending, and they devised a new one, which has Chris waking up again in the canoe. She sees Jason at the window, and suddenly he disappears, and she doesn't know what's going on, and Mrs. Voorhees pops out of the water at her. sort of recreating the ending of the original Friday the 13th where Jason jumps out of the water. So it sort of brings the whole idea full circle.
Part 3 was the most successful of any of the sequels to Friday the 13th until you got to Freddy vs. Jason. But at the time, it was really, really successful. It was the #1 movie the week it came out. It was #1 the week after it came out, and it actually came out the same exact weekend as Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
I was so excited to get a call from Frank Mancuso the weekend, Sunday I think it was, of the opening week, and he said to me, 28. And I said, 28? You mean 28 screens didn't work? And he goes, no, we've done $28 million. And what's amazing to me right now in 2008 is that movies have opened all this year with an opening weekend of $7 million. And so would you realize what $28 million means in 1982 money? Those theaters went sold out for the entire weekend, to the point that we ran out of glasses on Sunday night and had to get the Polaroid Corporation to work overtime to get glasses to the theater.
I didn't really have a movie career. This was my one big role, and then I sort of faded into obscurity, but I wanted to be an actor, and it didn't happen, and I'm happy as a lawyer now, but that I have this role that, you know, I was the one who, as I say, gave Jason his hockey mask, so I have that little part of film history, which is great, and people, you know, I get emails from all over the world from people who go, hey, you gave Jason the hockey mask.
None of us knew at that time, I don't think even in the other franchises, that it would start living a life of its own like that. Looking back to be part of that, it was just a cool thing.